Hi everyone, my name's Manoli and welcome to another episode of Studio Crete, the show that explores arts and culture from a Cretan perspective. On today's episode, we're going to be talking to Mim about art and power. Enjoy the show. G'day guys, welcome to another episode of Studio Crete. My name is Manoli and today we have Mim with us to talk about art history and her current creative pursuits. How you going, Mim?
I am well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for
I feel a
joining.
celebrity.
Well, I think we're just building on the existing brand as you are a pretty big local celebrity in the community anyway.
Oh, yes, of course. Studio Crete is just the next shining star on my step to fame.
Well, let's bright that star up a little bit. For the people who aren't watching at home, do you mind giving them a bit of an insight into yourself?
I am currently an art historian. I'm completing my PhD in medieval art history. And when I'm not doing that, I work as a freelance artist. So kind of my day job and my night job.
Could you talk to us a little bit about your fine art endeavors as well?
So I did do a degree in painting as well. But I found that they really overlapped. Like I've always been really fascinated with a lot of like classical history tropes, and it bleeds into a lot of my work. My final project to finish my degree was I did a neoclassical painting on plastic. And I was really fascinated with the way that even people looking at a certain style like that seem to ascribe it like a lot of value. And I asked people to come up with like rose water and rub off bits of the painting. And this painting had taken me like months and months and months to do, right? And it was full on like neo-baroque. I think it was like a self-portrait of me riding a horse. I think it was like a gender bend of like the Dimitri thing. So I was like the Dimitri figure. And it was like super dramatic. And but like what I was really interested in, like obviously painting that was fun. But what I was really interested in was the way that people saw a certain style of image and were so hesitant to touch it. Even though I, the artist, was like, please come forward and ruin my painting. I was like sitting there being like, ruin my painting. But there's a certain kind of like meaning that we ascribe, I guess, to like really like classically painting-y looking works. And there was so much like hesitation. And then I really liked that develop like as the first person did it, then you see people kind of just piling on and almost taking pleasure in destroying it, which was like confronting for me as somebody who like put it together, but was just so interesting to watch. That kind of inspired me to look at like power and imagery and the power that it has on other people. And then it led me to history, and I was looking at like, I wanted to look at religious imagery. I was raised Greek Orthodox. I understand powers of icons. And I wanted to see how that kind of functioned back then. So I really wanted to look into that. And that's where my thesis is, really looking at one specific Virgin Mary and how she was so powerful in the region that you have kings, popes, bishops, like basically every celebrity figure at the time interacting with her as a way of asserting like political, actual physical control over a whole territory. So this image is so powerful that interacting with it or like donating to it or associating yourself with it is enough to control real land. So that was really interesting to me.
Why do you think just an image, or this particular image of the Virgin Mary that you studied, was so powerful and such an attraction for people to leverage for their own gain?
So it's very remote. And for some reason, people have studied this for many, like eons, but the more remote something is, the more holy it's kind of thought to be. I don't know if it's just it's difficult to get to, so you have to really want to go. But politically, it also intersects because this church is at a crossroads between like three massive territories at this time, three massive kingdoms that are all fighting each other for power. So it's almost like right in the middle. So controlling this church or being associated with this church or offering protection to this church or seeming to own it gives you a massive foothold in this no man's land territory where all these places are overlapping. So that's why all these kings and bishops and popes are making the trek to visit this place and associate themselves with it. Because it's a foothold. It's like the best way to assert yourself in a territory. But then you also have that kind of building the reputation of this place. So then you have heaps and heaps and heaps of pilgrims coming through here, experiencing miracles, adding to the myth making of this particular icon, and it's like healing properties, and then the town definitely takes advantage of it and has like annual jubilee celebrations that further kind of like bolster its rap. So it's definitely the really nice, this is where my fascination lies, a really nice mix of like spiritual and political power kind of working together to create this.
As you've been talking about, not necessarily about that dynamic, one thing I think about is the Acropolis and the Parthenon, and how modern Greece has used its own central icon and all the symbolism that's associated with that, whether it's about classical Greece, whether it's about the capital of the country and the idea of Hellenism, how they've used that hill and those ancient ruins to build a myth and an identity around. It sounds like in a similar way. I know they're completely different dynamics, but to translate...
No, it's totally true. It's the more people visit the Parthenon, the more powerful it becomes as a symbol, right? It doesn't mean that it's not an interesting piece of architecture, but we can't say there's not other Parthenons. You know what I mean? But the more that you give attention to this specific place, the more meaning it has. And the more that the surrounding region starts to opt into it as its identity. And that's what's happening here with the Virgin Mary. They start to call themselves like the town of the Virgin Mary rather than just the Puy. So they very much like keep that identity going in the same way as Athens. You associate Athens with the Parthenon, and they really make that clear when you go there. They're like, yep, it's Athens. First stop, the Parthenon. You can see the museum, it's underneath. But like, it's very much like fostered by the town because it works, right? And it works for this tiny town in the middle of nowhere on top of a mountain. And it works for the Parthenon. So
we've only touched on 2 examples here, but the power of art, whether it's in iconography or in sculpture or in architecture, can define the people around it and can be used for so many different reasons, whether it's controlling power of those 3 warring parts of France that you mentioned, or whether it's building a country like the modern Greek state.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Even things like Flinders Street Station, right? You know, it's iconically Melbourne because we make it iconically Melbourne. You know what I mean? Like we put it on the postcards, we put it everywhere, we build it up. So it's definitely, those things go hand in hand as kind of powerful tools, but they need us to kind of give them power. So it's a very interesting kind of dynamic there. I know that we were talking before about what is and what isn't art, and particularly like I, in my most kind of recent work, have been my artwork, sorry, not my history work. Let's just pivot. Have been looking at like traditional, I guess, art pieces and traditional kind of stuff of Crete, because I found myself, I never really thought of Crete as a source of inspiration. Weirdly, I had been taking a lot of my inspiration from like Italy and like Europe, those kind of like more classical like European context, in terms of like that's where I was kind of interested in. I'm really interested in the Renaissance, so that kind of stuff. But it was, I was having kind of a chat about like cultural appropriation, and I was like, why don't I have a look at the culture that is actually mine? You know, I was like, let me just have a look. And I found just like, okay, we don't have the same kind of Renaissance painting culture as I was, you know, neo-Baroque kind of Caravaggio kind of stuff, but that's fine. But what I was looking at and what kind of caught my eye were Cretan textiles. So in my research of like trying to be inspired, I found that like Crete and Cretans and I guess traditional like Cretan weavers, please ignore my dog in the background, have like a really interesting visual language that is born out of like Ottoman and like Venetian influence, obviously, because we're a port city. So you get this kind of like weird kind of Eastern look into it. And there are like amazing colors and amazing kind of patterns in a way that I hadn't seen. Like I'm very familiar with like the yaya doily, which is white, obviously, and goes on top of everything. Like, and that is art. Like thinking about these kind of things as art kind of changed my like perspective.
It's amazing because it also touches on a difference in the art world, and I think there's a message in, or a question that needs to be asked about what we value or what we see as art in a society. Why aren't we valuing almost social cultural art at an everyday level the same way this heightened sense of high culture, or we distinguish between that? It could be a Western and an Eastern European thing. It could be a class thing. It's fascinating when you change your perspective. I
honestly think it's a gender thing, just because these are artworks, or I guess these are practices that are traditionally associated with the home. So it's, you know, it's not one male artist genius taking his painting, chucking his gallery. Everybody's like, it's a woman making a tea towel for a house, or like a blanket for a house, or a blanket for her children. So it's just not elevated to that level in the eyes of society. But if you think about it, and particularly when I've been incorporating it into a more traditional style by using, I guess, Cretan motifs in my painting, it is art, and it is like amazing, and it's creative and interesting.
It's fascinating how you have raised that idea of what is art, and maybe we should be aware that it is everywhere around us and in our homes. Cretan tradition does include weaving and textiles. It does include costume, and people see those aspects as part of themselves, but they never really see themselves as artists or engaging with art. But the two, identity, art, culture, they're so intertwined, and I think we need to recognize that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's just being able to see artistic value in these kind of cultural products. Like I had never seen it before. Like I'm a victim of this as well. I had never even considered looking at Crete for art inspiration, to be honest with you. And I know that's kind of ignorant, but it had just never even crossed my mind. And it was only when I started kind of really like looking into it that I saw just like how much like artistic merit that there is there. So I really would encourage like people to have a look around them, like have a look around your house, see the kind of weird thing that your yaya made for someone's brica. Like it's amazing. And the people that make them are amazing. I think that that's a big thing too. Like, yeah, it's like a little old lady in a village somewhere, but like she does amazing work and she is an artist. Like, I think elevating these products means you also elevate the people that make them, and they kind of deserve just as much respect and just as much like attention for the things that they create, which are amazing.
Before we let you go, Mim, I have to ask you, what's the most Cretan thing in your house?
Okay, so the most Cretan thing in my house was given to me by my yaya when I first moved out against her wishes. So she gave me, and we've spoken about it, this beautiful tea towel that she has definitely picked up off some stall in the back of Crete and pretended that she bought it for me specifically. So you can see the traditional Cretan dances. It does get a lot of comments in my home. It's got pride of place. It's the decorative tea towel no one's allowed to use.
Oh, that's so good, Mim. I love it.
She was like, I have a present for you. I'm like, you definitely just grabbed something back.
Well, Mim, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to say to our viewers before we let you go?
Have a look around your house for little bits of art. That's all.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Mim. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of another episode of Studio Crete. If you want to find out more, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our website. Thank you to all the volunteers and artists who made this show possible. And a big thank you to the Cretan Brotherhood community for their support throughout the program. We look forward to seeing you all together again at the Cretan Brotherhood. Thanks guys, we hope you enjoyed the show.